And I did talk to one PLA collector, PLA officer, and I had just gone on with DIA at the time. And he looks at me curious as we're talking. We had met at a park bench type of thing, meeting, talking. And he's saying, "You're doing this for a book?" I said, "Yes, that's right." And we talked. I said, and it's a scholarly book, yes. But you're in the Defense Department. You're in the government. And I said, "Yeah. Everyone, including probably some people from the intel community, are going to read this because it's going to be in a published book." And it was something fascinating he said to me. And if you know this about Chinese culture, it's an amazing insight. He said, I know. I'll give this for a scholarly work, but I'm not going to be a traitor to my country."
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today's Combat Story is a fascinating deep dive on Chinese intelligence structure, tactics, capabilities, and threats with longtime China expert Nicholas Eftimiades. Nick spent 34 years in the U.S. government with CIA, DIA, State, DHS, and more, with an intense focus on China and high-tech space programs. In the 90s, Nick wrote the book Chinese Intelligence Operations, which is an examination of the structure, operations, and methodology of Chinese intel services, and widely regarded as a seminal work in the field. To give you an idea of how impactful this work was, Nick was immediately labeled by the Chinese government as an enemy of the state. 100+ Chinese intel officers were recalled to China, and he was asked to appear before Congress and personally brief political leaders on both sides of the aisle. He's served overseas in many places, including Frankfurt, Moscow, and London, and Tokyo, after having studied in China and Taiwan in college where he picked up the language. His long career in DIA includes senior assignments, including Chief of Counterterrorism Operations and the Futures Division. He's been awarded the National Intelligence Council Achievement Award and DIA Director's Intelligence Award. He's a non-resident senior fellow at the Forward Defense Practice of the Atlantic Council's Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security and a professor at Penn State. He's a frequent lecturer on topics ranging from future technology, space, and national security issues, primarily around China. And his company, Shinobi Enterprises, offers confidential consulting and training with specific and in-depth expertise on China's domestic environment, national security, and commercial espionage operations and tactics. Nick is an expert on all things China, and I hope that you enjoy this deep dive on the threats and organization and structure of the Chinese intelligence services. Nick, thanks so much for taking the time to share your story with us today.
Not a problem. Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, it's been a while in the making, getting us together, and I'm really grateful that we do have the time. One of the areas I wanted to start, though, Nick, is you have a very comprehensive and I would say complex background. I see CIA, DIA, DHS, state, space, China. When, I don't know, you're a professor now, when your students or you meet somebody, when they ask you what you did, how do you describe that to them? Like, what's your pitch to them in this kind of pretty complex background?
I usually roll it up and say I did a career in the intelligence community, just because it's, as you just pointed out, it's sort of moved around a bit. I did part of my undergraduate and graduate work in Taiwan and mainland China, and then went from there to when I came back and went into CIA. Spent about 4 years in CIA in technical operations, and from there to diplomatic security service, where I became a special agent. Then I made a huge career mistake. I went to Defense Intelligence Agency from there, where I spent the bulk of my career, about 29 years in DIA.
Why is that a mistake? Why do you say that?
Well, I think I particularly think I should have spent some more time with it. State was at that time, 86, when I went in, they were building the security agents corps, and they were extraordinary. We had, Chinese speakers in my class. We had a tremendous variety. The training was outstanding, and it was a great mission. So, like a lot of people, I jumped because of the maintaining a dual career, because my wife was also full-time work. So that became a challenge. But given the mission and given the expansion of the mission as we stepped into this age of terrorism, it would have been an extraordinary career to keep on with. And DIA is a very, very difficult place to work.
Interesting. Okay. Obviously, having spent time at CIA, we obviously work with DIA, but I just have never really heard about the inner workings there. So I'm sure we'll get into it. But when you mentioned that you spent time studying in mainland China and Taiwan, what took you there? Why, of all places in the world, did you end up there?
Yeah, that's really kind of weird. It was I started in martial arts when I was 9 years old, and just at that time Asian culture, yeah, I didn't know enough, but I said Asian culture, but so I didn't know the distinctions of different cultures throughout Asia. But I was interested enough that I knew I wanted to study and learn more about that. So I think I went when around my 19th birthday. I actually arrived in Taiwan. So and it was just draw of the culture and society and the history that I had been living with or studying for a decade.
Wow. What was your language skill level at the time?
Going to Taiwan, zero. I mean, I basically could say hello in the language. By the time I got out, I think they probably gave me 2 years worth of language credits. When I got back to George Washington University and said, okay, you don't have to take any more language in your major. You're past all that. So that was good. When I went back to do graduate work in Taiwan and then just to do research on the mainland, I was going to classes in Chinese. So I guess it was, that good at the time. I don't want to tell you and CIA hired me because of my Chinese language skills and tech ops. They had a specific need for that. So odd story there and how that happened. So I was, at that time, it took us so long to get clearances done. And I think I've been waiting upwards of 20 months.
What?
And,
wow.
Yeah.
That's long.
And and the agency said, look, we're going to give you a job in personnel, just waiting. And I mean, I'm a kid out of college with a couple of grad credits at this point. And they said, we're going to give you a job in personnel waiting until your clearance comes through, because we only need a secret for that. So it'll be a couple of months, do that. We'll pay you. In those days, they literally paid me cash. I went to the cashier, they paid me out in cash every week. So I fielded a call. I was there late, 5 o'clock. I fielded a call from someone at OTS, and he asked for so-and-so, said, she's not here. Well, how about so-and-so? He's not here. Maybe I can help you. What are you looking for? And I said, well, first thing we need is someone who speaks Chinese. Okay. I think I can help you. Go ahead. And, he outlined a little, who are you? And, I said, yeah, I do speak Chinese. So we went from there. And it was, good career. Technical ops is I worked for Tony Mendez. I don't know if you know that name.
Oh, yeah.
Argo. Yeah. And Tony was
famous
boss. Yeah. Infamous inside. And it was, I did 125,000 miles a year on the road. So as a 24-year-old at the time, doing over 100,000 miles a year at the road, I was, it was interesting. It was exciting, at that age, at that time. But you don't do that if you do that as a career, it has effects on you.
And I believe Tony Mendez and his wife are kind of known as the masters of disguise, right? Like worked a lot in the disguise area. He may have also pioneered some of the Moscow style disguises. I believe some of his work.
He worked. He went to Moscow and worked pretty intensely to figure out ways to work under that operating environment. And Tony was extraordinarily creative, and John, who I've known very well, over decades. She's absolutely a wonderful person. Inside ball, we had no idea how she wound up with him. I mean, it was like getting hit in the head. What? John and Tony? What the hell? She was such a sweet person, such a sweet, gentle person. And Tony was a tiger. I mean, he was tenacious and everything. And,
yin and yang. Yeah.
Clobbered anyway. Yeah, it was just crazy. So long story made short. He did a lot of that. He was very, very creative in things to do. That was his specialty. His creativity as he applied in basically art and disguise.
Wow.
So, but creative people are difficult to manage, And, they just are. And I've seen this over a career. I've had people I manage who are just brilliant and creative, and they come out with just, phenomenal things that 1 out of 100 times, that 1 out of 100 times, the brilliance is just extraordinary, and it moves us all forward. But it's the other 99 times that you have to. All right. Thank you very much for your input. Get back to work.
Now that you mention it, for people who don't know, and whatever we can say, about OTS, like what's that type of work? Because people might not understand that acronym with like, why do you need a China speaker and why is somebody on the road for that? So as much as we can say in this setting.
Right. It's Office of Technical Services, which I believe now recently has actually changed its name. Tony used to say, we make spying cool. And if you ever watch Mission Impossible, it's all the technical stuff that they put together to support clandestine operations. So, you can think of now a world with AI and sensors that can determine a million things from whether you're diseased or not, and all these types of things that you can apply to identify people and to detect things, are the things that OTS specialize in.
Yeah. And then why do you need a Chinese speaker, I guess, in a place like that? Because that sounds like you're in a building in an R&D lab, but you're on the road, you got this language background.
Well, I'll just use the example of Argo.
Perfect. Let's do it.
So Argo, Mendez went in with, what was his name? He just came out openly too. I'll remember it as we go along, that who was a Persian speaker and Persian writer. So as Tony needed to, create signatures and embarkation cards and things like that they actually needed to do, you obviously need a Persian speaker for that. Someone who knows the language extremely well. Well, in this case, we had one, and Tony went in with him.
Interesting. Got it. You mentioned your time in China. I was hoping I think we're going to spend quite a bit of time on China. Could you speak through when you visited China or Taiwan over the years? Because I'm sure that the difference from, as you mentioned, like from the time you're in college to other times you've been back have to be stark contrasts.
No, because the last time I was back was in the 90s. Okay. And the reason that is because towards the end of the 90s, because of my book, Chinese Intelligence Operations, which resulted in 100 Chinese intelligence officers being sent back to China, 110 or so, congressional hearings, and China and the People's Daily declaring me an enemy of the people.
Yes.
So literally at that time, the government said, you're not going back, period.
No.
In fact, the same has applied to my kids and my wife. And I said, no, not with that name. You're not going back.
Jeez. How close do you get?
Assuming they would even give me a visa, which is
for sure. Well, I'm sure they would. So you would come in and then, you just wouldn't leave. It'd be a one-way trip.
Right. Getting back isn't the problem. Getting back out again is.
Oh, geez. But even going to Taiwan, does that give you, does that kind of get your spidey sense going when you're even going that close?
So, my generation is sort of I do a lot of writing now, a lot, particularly since I've left the government. So that's been, I think that's a real contribution. I like to think that. But, there's sort of your heyday in life and career when you know everybody and everybody knows you or knows of you. So there are a lot of one-book wonders out there now for like Eftimiades. Where have I heard that name before? And I get that. So I'm planning on going to Taiwan within the next 6 months or so. So it'll be interesting, actually, who knows me and who just, oh yeah, I remember my dad spoke about you, or something like that.
Interesting. So Nick, you mentioned this book that you write in the 90s that gets the attention of a lot of people. I didn't realize it sent 100 operators home, which I love hearing. What gave you the impetus to write that in the first place?
So, comedy of errors.
That's my favorite.
I was taking a graduate course at University of Maryland, and the professor I had, it was just after Tiananmen. And I had a lot of friends or people in the Chinese community. The book was kind of interesting because I was taking a graduate course, and I wrote on Chinese intelligence, and I was able to because it was just after Tiananmen. So we had a lot of people coming out of the woodwork saying, I was spying for China, and I feel so bad about doing that. So I actually wound up interviewing 3 MSS officers, a PLA collector, and a number of people who were recruited assets. And this was a crazy time, right? So I'm doing this as as an academic work, writing a paper, and I hand in the paper, and the professor says to me, I've never seen anything done on this subject before. Never anything. You should take it incomplete for the course and do it like 30, 40 pages, see what you can get out of it. And I'm rolling my great, just what you want to hear. Take it incomplete for the course.
Yeah, can't he give you an A and you do this?
Yeah, really? Is that what's you're going to give me an A, right? So, I did. I take it out to about 30, 40 or so pages, and then I just started. I got a lot of sources that came in. I got. It's about the time I started going on to DIA as well. So I had a whole deconfliction I had to do with the security apparatus. But that's where I got it. And by the time I was done, it was the only academic work out that ever had come out on Chinese espionage. I actually did line of block charts of the MSS and things. And I had, MSS officers telling me, so, and multiple sources. So it was actually pretty good, pretty solid work. The sort of the volcano that erupted when this went to the Congress was through no fault of my own. One of the companies that the PLA had people intelligence officers in, was the company that was identified giving money to the Democratic National Committee, which I had no idea. Yeah. But they picked up on it pretty quickly. And once they did, there were congressional hearings and a lot of media interviews, and it just was Naval Institute's bestseller for the year.
Did you feel like this was your 15 minutes of fame? I got to imagine you were on shows, you're in Congress,
I was, Connie Chung, ABC, NBC. I was on a lot. And about the 15 minutes I was interviewed, you know what I felt? I had been the chief of counterterrorism operations now a few years into it. And I remember thinking about my IC career. I said, I don't think I've ever done anything that compares to the impact I felt I had with this, which is really a little deflating.
Sorry, with Nick, with the book, or with CTC? Okay, yeah.
No, with the book. You do a case, you do something, you're able to stop something in terrorism, great. And then the next day there's something else. Yeah. And then the next day there's something else. And I never kind of felt the sense that we were gaining on it. Yeah. So you take something like this though, and it was really altered the bureaucracy. I saw the legislation that came out of it. The whole DOD required to do an assessment for the Chinese military was a result of this. I spoke to a lot, Newt Gingrich and any number of others.
Wow.
I did a lot of one-on-ones with members of Congress and just educating them about what we were facing with China, and specifically Chinese espionage.
Just a quick word from our sponsor, HelloFresh, and we'll get right back to this combat story. As you know, we love HelloFresh in my house, and we've been using them years before they started sponsoring the show. We eat at least 3 HelloFresh meals each week, but sometimes as many as 5. Our kids don't know it yet, but as soon as they're out of school for summer, they'll be making these meals each night because it's so easy with all the ingredients delivered straight to your door and step-by-step instructions. Even teenage boys can handle it. What's great about HelloFresh is you can ditch what I like to call the meal planning woes and dive into their biggest menu yet with over 50 recipes. I love it because of the taste and time savings. You can cut down on time spent in the kitchen so you can get back to enjoying the summer sunshine thanks to their quick and easy recipes, which are ready in just 20 minutes or less. We do at least one of those a week, oftentimes 2. My family's most recent favorite dish is creamy dill chicken with roasted potatoes and green beans. Last night, I made paprika chicken in a lemony sauce with pistachio rice and roasted carrots. I never would have taken the time to make something like that on my own had I not had all the ingredients handed to me and step-by-step instructions. Go to HelloFresh.com/combatstoryapps for free appetizers for life. 1 appetizer item per box while subscription is active. That's free appetizers for life at HelloFresh.com/combatstoryapps, APPS. HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit. And now, back to this combat story. And you were fairly junior in your career at the time, right? So were you getting any pushback from some of the more senior analysts or folks that were like, I've been doing this for years. This young guy doesn't know what he's talking about?
I was investigated again and again, polygraphed. My phones were
Oh my God, the polygraph must have been intense for you on this.
It was. And I got, there's a lot of, which the system eventually wrote off to a lot of jealousy. But to be honest, I got the snot beaten out of me. And there were a number of nights I went to sleep thinking, I didn't do anything wrong. Why did they, but it was a lot of stress. It was a tremendous amount of stress and a lot of jealous analysts. I caught one, I received an email from a guy in Army in SCOM congratulating me on my forthcoming book. I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. How do you know about it? And the way he knew about it was an analyst in his office had a copy. Because when I submitted it for review, they burned copies and sent it out all over. So I said, he's not supposed to have that. Can you grab it for? And the guy did. He grabbed it for me. And when I took a look at it, I saw all these underlined parts and parts that were marked off.
That's when you know it's good.
Yeah, I guess. But then I actually got called by his management and I went in to talk. So the analyst is on vacation and the management isn't going to tell me what's in the report because it's originator controlled. It's ORCON, very super secret stuff. And I said, you don't have to tell me, I'll tell you. Do you have this line and block? Do you have these words? And the guy copied word for word everything I had. Wow. 9 pages we found word to word, word by word. And he'll just slap classifications on it. So I ran into a lot of that a couple of different times. And of course, every time you run into something like that, some people say, well, wait a minute, I just saw the same thing Eftimiades said in classified, in classified documents.
Then it looks bad. Yeah.
It was a recurring nightmare between myself, security, and the IG. And I think finally they sent a note to General Clapper at the time and said, look, this guy has done everything legally and ethically correct. So, and that put an end to the, to the official inquiries on me. There were always analysts who were mumbling.
Of course. Hey, I'm fascinated by this. How on earth did you get to meet some of these sources like MSS officers, PLA? How did you end up connecting with these folks? Clearly the language had to help, but where do you find it?
It certainly did. And I was living in Chinatown in DC at the time. And so I had a lot of local contact. What do I know? I'm, out of college and stuff, and I'm using the language. And, at that time, especially, nobody spoke Chinese. So, it was always, very, very impressive, that type of thing. And I knew a lot in the dissident community. And that's where people surfaced once, Tiananmen happened. People turned and said, I'm sorry, I've been spying. I never should have, done this. And even back to MSS officers. So that's where it started.
Did they know where you were working at that time? Is that part of it, or was it the language?
It is. Well, it's absolutely part of it. But I had an interesting conversation. I go back to, there's a deep, deep understanding of Chinese culture, Confucian-based culture, and what they perceive as the value of education, right? And scholarship. So I was, as I said, which was the truth, I was doing this for scholarship. It was important that people understand the role, how China makes its decisions, and the role of intelligence and the role of information, and how that's worked in, honestly, how the CCP makes decisions on it. That's what I was telling people. So it's a work of scholarship. And I did talk to one PLA officer, and he's looking at me, and I had just gone on with DIA at the time. And he looks at me curious as we're talking. We had met at a park bench type of thing, meeting, talking. And he's saying, you're doing this for a book. I said, yes, that's right. And he goes, okay. And we talked. And I said, and it's a scholarly book, yes. But you're in the Defense Department. You're in the government. And I said, yeah. But are they going to read this? And we went back and forth a bit about that. Yes, but I'm doing this as a scholarly work. And we went back and forth. And finally, he said, but you're in intelligence. And said, sir, everyone, including probably some people from the intel community, are going to read this because it's going to be in a published book. And it was something fascinating he said to me. And if you know this about Chinese culture, it's an amazing insight. He said, I know. I'll give this for scholarly work, but I'm not going to be a traitor to my country.
Yeah.
I mean, he was willing, if it was an issue of scholarship, he was willing to talk. If he thought it was just a clandestine relationship that went back to an intel community, didn't want anything to do with it. So that mindset shows you where scholarship is and their thinking.
That's so one of the things that I noticed as I was doing research for this is, and I didn't realize this, I never worked China, certainly not the way that you and some of my colleagues had. We have the MICE acronym as we're looking at potential sources. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about MICE, but the disparity you draw in your literature or kind of the scholarly work you've done about how diverse the motivation set is for someone from China. Could we speak, hopefully this is a good segue into that just based on what you mentioned.
Sure. What I actually did to give people a background was I reviewed something. I mean, I have a database now that has 825 cases. Okay. That's a lot of cases and it's not just espionage. It's, it's economic espionage. It's illegal technology transfer. It's all that type of stuff. Right. So, but I didn't. And as I looked through all those cases, I was able to attribute motivations to each one of them, or not each one of them, but about almost 500 of them at the time. So that's a fair amount of, of data to draw off of, right? So what I found is that, and I wrote a work on this for the European Intelligence Academy, is, and it's, Chinese motivations for committing espionage, getting rid of the MICE.
Yeah, let's talk. What is MICE then? That acronym.
Money,
ideology,
coercion, and ego.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, so, compromise, coercion, ego,
right.
And that's why regular people, we think in the West, that's why people spy for those factors. Okay.
Yeah. So it turns out, though, you can look at it from another way, and there are a couple of different acronyms that come up with this, but you have academic. I mean, academic advancement is used as a barter for the theft of some research and technology, right? I've actually seen that conversation go back and forth for a guy saying, I want an associate professor and I'll bring this research back. And no, we'll give you an assistant professorship for this. No, I want an associate professor. And because being a scholar, being a professor in China is viewed so highly, that actually becomes a currency.
Wow.
So there's academic, there's business interests. You will find a stark contrast in the economic espionage motivations. So, and as an example, let's say 160 or so cases on the theft of information technology. Okay. All those cases, most of them, I'd say, the vast majority, basically trace back to a business relationship in China. Meaning it's going into a factory, it's going into, they're trying to advance, they're trying to start something that will be competitive in the IT framework, okay? If you look at aerospace technologies, you find almost none done for business. They're far more likely to be doing it for cash.
Mm.
And the reason is because of the startup costs in aerospace. I mean, no one's stealing that type of technology for, they're selling it as opposed to going over and building a business, which you find in so many other aspects of technology, not just IT, but biotechnology and others. They're actually incorporating it into a business. Hey, I'm going back to China. I'll work for you. I want a vice presidency of the company. I want this. I want that. I want stock options. And I'll bring all this with me. That's what you typically see.
What is the difference? The business side is not monetary versus the cost. Like, what is the business versus cost?
Well, and that's what if you're an insider threat person, this is what you start looking for. You start looking, okay, so the business side is a person who's looking to go back to China and advance their career.
Oh, it's a career advancement in business.
Yes.
Got it.
Right. It's going to a competing firm or starting a firm or getting funded by the state-owned enterprises there to start something competing in that. Right. You occasionally see that in aerospace in some of the technologies, but not often. Most of those are cash and carry deals where, we're stealing this technology and we're sending it out under, lying on customs documents and sending it out under something else.
And that's to make money, the cost side.
Right. That's the cost
Got
side.
it. Okay.
That's the money side or wealth side. There's also ethno-nationalism. So we say nationalism or ideology would have been a nice comparison, right? But it's not really ideology in the case of China because nobody believes in the Chinese system as it is. They believe in being Chinese. We'll do this for the motherland.
Mm-hmm.
They believe, particularly when it's ethnic Chinese, they believe that. But nobody ever spied for China because they believe in the CCP.
Yeah, the Communist Party in that case.
Right.
But yeah.
Nobody ever spied back. I mean, we particularly, if you look at the old British, there was some really dedicated communists that spied for the Soviet Union. But you don't really find that in dealing with China. You don't find that. You do find ethno-nationalism. Do this because you're Chinese. A lot of that.
Can I ask real quick before we go into another one on that one? I have similar questions with Russia, like what we know of Russia going back to like 1917, and then before that, they've kind of post pre-communism, they tried to kind of wipe a lot of this off of the map. With the CCP side and maybe the ethno-nationalism, is it this love of what used to be, or just what has always been in China, like the people itself? Is there an idea there, or is it just like we want to support the ethnic Chinese?
They'll say it's a civilization there.
That's it. Okay.
Not even a nation. It's a civilization. And remember, it's got a 5,000-year history. And that's what PLA colonel told me, Nick. We've had wars that were longer than your country's been around. So think about it that way.
Yeah.
And it is. It's a grand, deep, centuries, millennium-old civilization, right? And they've had a long time to become culturally aware and integrated and to form one type of culture, Confucian-based, humanistic society that moves forward. And that's, as I used to say in the 1990s, changing that is got to be darn near an impossibility.
Wow.
So that approach, and people are very, very loyal to that history. And on top of that, the Chinese Communist Party does everything it can to build nationalism, which is, to be frank, until recent years, it's always had a problem with building nationalism. Relentless campaigns on the foreigners are going to do this and protect ourselves. And there was basically a tunnel system built under every village in China during Vietnam, because it was the Americans are going to nuclear bomb us. They're going to attack. So they mobilized the masses. And I've spoken to Chinese who say they were absolutely exhausted by these mobilizations, these mass mobilizations that were constantly put out by the CCP to garner support. CCP has made some advances in recent years because they've delivered. A lot of people have made money in China.
Were they at odds, I guess, nationalism and the CCP for a particular reason? Like previously, they felt one couldn't exist. If nationalism was too strong, it might overtake the idea of the CCP?
Well, right now, the CCP has successfully merged those ideas that, nationalism is the CCP.
Okay.
Belief in the CCP. So that's the challenge that exists. And it's also why, it explains why China is completely unable to let any information in, why they control and stop anything that's negative against the CCP. It's a healthy state of paranoia for them. Nothing can threaten the party. Nothing can affect the party. I mean, that's the strength of their base. Yeah. So they will let horrific things happen in society rather than and blame it on foreigners, as they typically do. I have seen signs in Shanghai, pictures of signs in Shanghai blaming Lithuania for China's economic woes. Lithuania, but they blame everyone except themselves.
Okay.
The CCP. So we do have this ethno-nationalism, repression or coercion. You have some of that, but not a lot. I mean, lots of people talk about it. Not really. I mean, it happens in the dissident communities. That's the most common place. That type of, where you have relatives in China. And it's also very, very discreet, implied. Like, oh, you should help us because otherwise, I think there could be big trouble. I have had more than one Chinese say that to me, and they react at that. They go, "That you big trouble me!" Oh, and immediately that phrase is immediately understood to be a threat against the family.
Grievous kind of.
Right. They don't like to do that, but they do that, and particularly the cops. The Ministry of Public Security is pretty hard-handed like that. So there is some element of repression. Global transnational repression that goes on. And last are emotional bonds. So this society, which is not legalistic like ours is, right? We have a law for friggin' everything in our society. In China, everybody breaks the law. It's an absolute norm. I mean, it's not, the laws, the whole legal system is under the CCP, right? So it's just what benefits the CCP. The law is simply a mechanism used by some parties against others. I think there's some aspects of trying to push to have some standardization in society based on the law, but really it's a joke. I mean, nobody pays attention to the law. They are, however, as a humanistic, and this is Confucian, right? It's okay to break the law if your cause is just, and your cause is okay. So these emotional bonds that you form are all society is structured on this in China, right? They have networks of, friendship is something different in China. And the Guangxi networks, as they're called, is how you get things done.
What is that?
Guangxi network is, I explain it to our own counterintelligence people as, the day you retire from this job, you're not going to talk to anyone here again, right? Think about that. You spend 30 years with people, you have lunch with them, you see them every day, you're great friends, you talk, they know about your life, you know about theirs, but the day you quit, it's probably the last time you're going to see them. Maybe you'll see a few of them, but that's interesting because they're your business friends. You need them and you establish relationships so you can get things done. All of Chinese society is like that. It's not just in the office. It's the whole of society. So as a result, for our own counterintelligence, for our world, the line and block charts really don't mean much in China. Oh, well, this agency's doing that, and that one does. No, they'll work across boundaries and, let me call him. He's my cousin's brother. He'll be able to do this for us. So the law, what the rules are doesn't mean a heck of a lot as much as your personal Guangxi networks. It's how business is done. It's how social interaction's done. And it's certainly how they run their intelligence works.
Interesting.
So if a professor, and we've seen this before, we've seen this in the US, if a Chinese professor calls you up, my student who's doing a PhD under me, hey, listen, I want you to get this, this, and this while you're in the US. Inevitably, they'll say, of course, professor. Of course. It's a Confucian system and it's an implied obligation. Obligation is a huge component of Chinese society.
Wow.
So it's, I briefed businessmen on this and it's, can I digress into a story that
I would love you to. Please.
So I was briefing the top 50, I guess, companies, members who are in the top 50 or 70, something like that, on Chinese negotiating tactics. And I'm explaining to them a story. As I was briefing a group of Fortune 50 companies, or Fortune 70, whatever it was, on Chinese negotiating tactics. And one of them was kind of shaking his head when I'm talking about the obligations that you incur and the types of interpersonal relationships you have to have in order to be effective in business. Doesn't mean a win-win doesn't mean anything to them. Trust and personal relationships mean everything. And the guy was kind of shaking his head. And at the break, he came over to me and I knew I was going to get a story from this. And he tells me, and I gave him a story that happened to me. And he said, something very similar happened to me. What's that? I said, we were doing an $11 million deal in China. It was a first start. It was nothing really. But the next deal was going to be well over 100 million. So we went there and, they had told us they were talking to a Japanese company. We knew that. And we sat there negotiating and discussing it. And after 2 days, at the last part of the day, the president of the company comes over to me and says, my son would like to study in the United States. Can he come live with you? And I said, oh, I've heard this before, right? Because I've had people who have come to live with me based on that relation and just show up at my door. And I said, so what did you say to him? And he said, I didn't know what to say. I said I would have to check into it and think about it. And I just didn't know how to react to that. And okay, so what happened? And he said, in 2 days, they told us they weren't going to do business with us. And then I found out that the company president's son went to study in Tokyo and was living with the president of the Japanese company. Now, what this illustrates to us, and as I explained in that brief, is that, if he was giving that U.S. person an opportunity, you can step into obligation here. We can be mutually obligated, blood brothers type of thing, and that will be the foundation of our business relationship.
And it wasn't nefarious, like, let me have him live with you and we'll understand what's going on the inside. It was truly just like, I'm going to work with you and here's what you're going to do on my side.
Right. It was just a situation of obligation. So as they say, you're in good in China doing business with someone when the person has your picture, your family's picture on their desk, right? That's when you know that you're, and it's the same thing here. We come up with ideas like, win-win and, tons of facts and lawyers that we throw at a situation, and they're rolling their eyes most of the time. That's not what they're looking at. So it's just an example. And it's the same thing in intelligence. We have, and I try and explain, these are different obligations and different types of relationships you have to establish with people in order to do your job.
Yeah. That's amazing. And I know you've trained 1,000+ counter-intel officers and officials. I wonder if this is...
By the way, last thing on this is that when you take the business opportunities, ethno-nationalism, wealth or money, academic advancement, repression, and emotional bonds, you get the acronym BEWARE.
Ooh, nice. So which of those applies to, I'll get the name wrong, Lin Wei Ding, the most recent Google engineer who was...
business opportunities. Absolutely, business opportunities.
So that's the China. B in BEWARE.
Right. Yeah, and it's a great case.
Can you give people background on that? Because not everybody will have heard it. Yeah.
So what this, and it's just a recent case that's come out.
Yeah.
And what this engineer is accused of doing is working for Google in the AI development. He went back and forth to China and actually had a colleague badging him in at the front door, so it wouldn't appear that he was outside of the U.S. But he went to China and he worked with a startup company and became the chief technology officer of the startup company, negotiated stock shares with that startup company, all to bring the Google's AI into China. So he's starting up that. In addition to that, he actually opened up his own company. So, I haven't seen like the documentation, whether he was actually betraying the people he was working with the startup, but he had multiple businesses going. And to be frank, Google's staff missed a lot on this. There's just no excuse for how much was missed in this. But, and they don't know, out of the over 500 documents that were taken, how many of them actually made it into, well, I think all of them made it into China, but we don't know what the implications are for that. So, but this is a classic example of that business opportunities paradigm for economic espionage. And along with that come several key indicators that, and with each one of these types of things are key indicators that insider threat specialists have to look for.
I'm going to take a hard turn for a second, but we're going to come back to the Chinese intel organization. But hearing your accent, Nick, and the way you talk, I got to imagine growing up, I'm assuming China wasn't in your cards. Like your parents weren't like, hey, you need to go over and study in China or focus on this. What was your childhood like, just in general? I'm kind of curious, where did you grow up? How did this?
No, I grew up in New York City. I cut school. I can't tell you how many times to go down to Chinatown and 42nd Street and watch colorful movies. That was sort of a lifeline for me. Parents were, my mother was a chemist, my father was a doctor, so they understood, which I didn't at the time, because I was Greek and loud and, sort of played on the streets a lot. But they understood the value of academics and hard work and tried to instill that. Probably wasn't till later in life that I really caught on to that.
Yeah.
But that was the basic upbringing that I had. I think my mother put me in martial arts to sort of, I won't say calm me down, but give me some focus and direction.
Yeah. And that kind of ignited that martial arts looking to Asia type pull.
That was certainly an ignition point. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
Interesting. We've mentioned a couple of these intel organizations on the Chinese side, MSS, PLA, I think you mentioned the MPS. Can you just give people a high-level overview? And I didn't know that the blocks were kind of blurred, on the hierarchical charts. I just assumed they were pretty structured. But the way you describe it, maybe there's a little more interplay. But at a high level, what are these different organizations focused on?
Well, as you can imagine, the PLA, which now called the Joint Intelligence Bureau, changed its formation in 2015 to 2016, is focused on military intelligence, obviously. Works out of military districts internally in the country and then overseas as well. They have collectors or case officers at embassies and consulates under official cover. They also work under unofficial cover or non-official cover. So businesses or things like that. They do a lot of focus on military technologies, military-related technologies. Ministry of State Security is China's preeminent civilian intelligence services. It has state security departments, which are, I don't want to say independent, or even quasi-independent, but they are state elements that are under general control of the MSS at a headquarters level. So they operate with a fair amount of freedom at these state and municipal levels. And as you can imagine, they work internally as well as externally. They have arrest powers, so there's some amalgamation of FBI and CIA in there. Their time overseas has gone up and down depending on the internal politics of China. The MSS has always been, since 1983 when it formed, it's taken a couple of hits. Chinese intel takes a couple of hits when purges happen because they don't want the intel people running around freely knowing how devastating they could be. So that literally happens against intel. They wipe out, if there's a change in regime, now it's a little more pleasant than it used to be, but you'll see a wipeout of Ministry of Public Security leadership and Ministry of State Security leadership.
Is it they're fired or is it worse? In the past, it was worse.
In the past, it was much worse. And even now, it's, again, because corruption is so pervasive in that society and because no one really follows the law, when you want to get rid of political opponents, you say, oh, well, wait a minute. He's been doing this. He's been collecting money. Put him into court and put him up in front of the stand. And they're like, well, wait a minute. You were collecting money. Some of that money I collected was with you. And, you got caught, it's everybody does it very, some people get caught. As Chinese, they have a saying that the unlucky ones get caught. So, but they know that everyone does that. So that is now the more official means used to get rid of political opponents when a new regime comes into power.
When was the most recent purge in that sense?
Oh, last year. Hu Jintao was, a year and a half ago, was walked out of the Chinese, I think it was a 5th-year planning session, and they walked him out, illustrating that the previous regime is done. And they worked their way up, arresting senior MPS officials and senior judges, all to get to that point where then they take out the top person. And this is what I mean when I talk about Guangxi networks. It's kind of like network warfare that you have to go. So if you look at China's decisions sometimes, and you say, well, wait a minute, why are they now moving towards digital currency? Why now? And I've heard a lot of people ranting, oh, they're trying to counter the U.S. And no, they're not. They know the corruption of money moving out of the country, and they're trying to stop that. They're trying to go after what was called the Shanghai Gang, under the previous regime of Jiang Zemin. They're trying to, because they can't control the financial sector. So Xi Jinping says, okay, let's put controls in the financial sector. That way we'll see where everyone's moving their money. And so much of what happens inside China is political infighting within the CCP. And it's just reflected differently as it comes out. Mostly people don't know and they're not aware of this. But being in the there's a saying that there's no such a thing as retirement from the Chinese Communist Party.
It's like the mafia.
And, because you get out and they're going to come after you if it's and that's why we've seen a lot of money, people now moving their money, including with the drug trade, is now being leveraged to move money from seniors over into the United States, because everyone's sort of feathering the nest if they have to get out.
Yes.
So, yeah, that's so, and that actually even impacts the drug trade, to the United States, because the Chinese have taken over in laundering money. And part of that is just so that they can get their official funds out.
Jeez. So that's MSS, PLA, MPS. Are there others that come to
Ministry
mind?
of Public Security, sure. One of the more prominent organizations, not an intelligence organization per se, is the United Front Work Department. And the United Front Work Department is internally and externally responsible. And this has been in Chinese communist history since its start. In building united front with non-communist organizations to make them work, or to manipulate them to work on behalf of CCP objectives. So Chinese overseas diaspora is a target for that. Overseas universities, foreign universities is a target for that. Even foreign businesses, although they're conducting business with a Chinese business, the United Front Work Department has requirements that they're going to levy on the Chinese business in that relationship. The sister city programs, 230 sister city programs, 234. People think, oh, that's great. That's, I'm having a relationship we're going to have with the sister city. Well, yes, but at the same time, you have to know that that's centrally managed out of the Chinese Communist Party, out of the United Front Work Department. They also field collectors in the same way. We've had New York City cops, which have been run by United Front Work Department collectors operating out of the consulate in New York. So they do a large part in collection, large part in sources, work closely with the Ministry of State Security, specifically the 12th Bureau, the Social Affairs Bureau of the Ministry of State Security, and they are a global force in collection, although they specifically target any threat to the CCP.
And I think reading some of your work, they operate differently in how they go collect. It's very broad, and they cast a very wide net, maybe, as opposed to some other intel organizations. How do you see that today? Is that still the case?
Yeah, well, I mean, given what I find more interesting, to be honest, is the fact that you had the Ministry of Public Security, the Chinese cyber security organization for the country, and the Ministry of State Security closely coordinating with the United Front. So it's not just the United Front after, like, for example, the case of Zoom. And if you take a look at the FBI's criminal complaint against officials in Zoom, you had emails going back and forth between the Ministry of Public Security, the Ministry of State Security, and Zoom officials on collecting information, back and forth from dissidents or from people, Chinese, overseas Chinese. 1 million of them, the MPS wanted, 1 million identities. Wow. Yeah, so it's everyone gets involved, everyone gets engaged. And the United Front Work, which Xi Jinping has called their magic bullet, is pretty expansive globally. And, working against political organizations. We've seen a case, Christine Lee in London, of her managing, actually them funding her and her starting political organizations in Parliament and having members of Parliament as members to, quote, look out for the Chinese in the UK. The reality is she was literally working at the embassy for the United Front Work Department. So their control is expansive. And they, you wouldn't think, but they look at, I mean, even in cases in Sweden, 92 refugees, 92 Tibetans in Sweden. And there were 2 MSS assets that were over 10 years that the Swedes wrapped up. Who goes after 92 Tibetans? Who, half of them were kids.
Wow.
Who cares? The CCP cares. That's the point. They squelch and they look for dissent anywhere, anything that they believe could threaten them globally, and they actually work to crush it.
Do the Chinese people look at these organizations with fear, or one in particular?
That's an interesting question. And the answer is I don't know. And I don't think anyone knows. We've learned a couple of things. Even opinion polls in China show an oddity that they don't care if the Chinese government has their information. They were very, very reactive to Chinese companies having personal information. You'd like to make the argument that, as I heard so much in the U.S., and this is where our policy has failed for nearly 40 years, with this attitude that inside every Chinese person is a freedom-loving American just dying to get out. I don't know if that's the case. Okay.
Yeah.
There are a lot of younger people who scream towards freedom, but the voices are squelched so quickly and so efficiently in the Chinese in China. It's hard to gain any understanding of exactly how they feel about these institutions. Yeah, just as an example, South Park, the TV show. During the Hong Kong uprising, South Park put out an episode where the kids started a boy band. And a boy band was immensely popular, but they had to get China's approval. That's what the agents and publishers were telling. No, you can't do anything unless China approves it. So there's a scene when Kyle, one of the kids, is writing lyrics, and back and forth behind him is a Chinese general, going pacing back and forth and reaching over and scribbling out things on his paper. So they have a couple of scenes like that in the show. They play that show online, and for a decade, for 12 years, South Park was hugely popular in China. That show went online within 24 hours. Every phrase, every word, every clip of South Park was wiped out off Chinese internet. Everything. It got to the point where people in Hong Kong were actually setting up giant screens and playing them on street corners and playing that video. But it gives you an example. So how do you know if a population is dissenting?
You wouldn't know.
Not from online, because government's quickly squelching that.
What in that database that you have, the cases that you're aware of that are public, what is one of the more disruptive or successful from a Chinese perspective cases against the U.S., whether it's business or government, that comes to mind for you?
Just so many of them. We've recently had Thomas Zhao and Patrick Wei, both Navy sailors, both arrested. Zhao was convicted, took a plea bargain. Wei is currently in court. And phenomenal penetrations inside the Navy for understanding of U.S. fleet movements in the South China Sea, U.S. Aegis systems, and U.S. defense capabilities for platforms. That can get people killed, particularly in the South China Sea. So there are just so many of these successes. Recently, a member of European Parliament, I'm talking within the last month, there have been at least 8 arrests throughout Europe of people conducting espionage on behalf of China. Targets included the UK Parliament, the EU Parliament, and it's interesting, in the case of the EU Parliament, they actually had text messages going back and forth from the Chinese handler to the member saying, talking about the objective to split Europe from the United States. So, where do you want to end? Theoretically, one could say, the things that China would consider a success aren't in the press, right?
Yeah. But
they're still ongoing. But it's like knocking balls out of batting cage. There are just so many cases that are coming up.
Do you think the proliferation of cases is because we've gotten better at identifying and uncovering, or because they are pushing more sources out to try to collect, or some of both?
I'm going to go with the thing of some of both, but I don't think, and I'm not going to say we've gotten better at this. We're actually terrible at it, and that just we are. I mean, we're trying, but we're outgunned, outmanned. And it's I make this argument to the FBI all the time. If you listen to Director Ray, he says they have one case every 12 hours. It's 2 cases a day, times 365, 730 cases a year, spread over 56 field offices. Exactly how does that work? 56 field offices handling over 700 cases a year. And you know what? I'm sure you're experienced in this. Cases take months and months, sometimes years, to actually work through.
Mm-hmm.
So, how many thousands are in backlog? But you point this out and say you've got to look at this at a strategic level and impose some type of cost for China doing this. And the agents will say, "Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That sounds good. How do I get my management to listen to it?" Which is the problem everywhere.
So when you say we're not so good at this, Nick, is it we don't understand them culturally to find them, or we don't put the resources and strategy in place to do it right?
Not a matter of resources. Other in the case of Department of Commerce, they have, dual use technology is a huge collection point for China, and they have a whopping 121 agents across the country.
Yeah.
I mean, that's compared to 17,000 for the Bureau. So, do the math. It's a main target sector, and they are, money-wise or budget-wise, they're way underclassed at this point. But outside of that, it's the strategy, it's political strategy, it's a U.S. government strategy. And if you talk to senior U.S. officials and say, what's our strategy towards China? Where do you see the relationship in 10 years? You get a deer in the headlights. What do you want from China? What do you want them to do or stop doing? Nobody. Everyone's very busy doing their jobs, and you can tell when they put a surge into certain areas. Right, we get a lot of cases that came out about since the unofficial police stations over the world. Well, the FBI said, "Hey, how is this happening in our backyard? It's been happening since the '80s." Okay, I mean, it really has. It just one of the cases I know was reported to the Bureau in 2010, and they just now arrested the guy out of New York. So it's they're deciding to put some emphasis on it. They're struggling. They're going against the tide. They're trying to figure out how to handle this all. And no administration, even the last one, is not showing leadership to say, okay, this is where we want to be in 10 years. Let's sit down with our allies. Counter-espionage, and that is going to be one aspect of this. Technology theft is another aspect of this. Manipulation of currency, another aspect of it. And fentanyl, again, is yet another aspect. I mean, China's told us that they're not going to stop funding precursor chemicals. That's what they do. They're actually underwriting the development of precursor chemicals. And they literally said, a few weeks ago, when the U.S. behaves properly, we'll address this issue. So, I mean, they know it's going fast. They know it's killing U.S. people. So they just don't care. It's a means of pressuring us.
The way we've talked so far about some of these Chinese intel organizations, it almost seems like a lot of their targets are Chinese nationals overseas that they're recruiting into service. Do you see them doing much or being successful in recruiting non-Chinese assets?
Sure. Most of the bona fide espionage cases that we have are non-Chinese assets. I mean, there have been some. There's Zhao and Patrick Wei, the two I just mentioned. There's Alexander Yuqingma, and he was just, confessed in court. So, a former CIA case officer. So there are definitely ones that you can point to. There's also Kevin Mallory and Ron Hansen and a number of other ones that are not Chinese nationals. Have no background association with China.
Interesting. I'm going to rear the TikTok ugly head here. We don't have to spend a ton of time on it because I'm sure you get a question.
By the way, Kevin Mallory was a friend of mine, a classmate of mine in diplomatic security service.
No way.
Yeah, I spent 5 months with him in training.
Had he been recruited at that time?
No, he hadn't been recruited at that time. He was, which I've always wondered if I can get access to him to talk to him about this. Say, Kev, what happened? And I met him again in DIA. He was in DIA. I was a case officer there. So, yeah, interesting guy. Very kind of self-reflective, quiet. He's what I call a watcher. He's always just kind of looking around at people. Very quiet. Not a spectacular performer, but a good performer. Like a Chinese speaker.
He's financially motivated on that one?
Yes, at that case, he was like $275,000 in debt. However, I kind of look at it this way. Kevin, I think, always had something up his sleeve. And personally, I was not one who trusted him. Maybe because he was very quiet. But so when he passed classified documents to China, and they also found classified documents in his home on an SD card, ranging from top secret on down, he had already been out like 5 years out of the consulting business and out of the intel world. So either the documents he passed were very old, or he had some other form of access. But the bottom line is, his area is 2012 when he's leaving the intelligence community. Why did he take the documents with him, only to be conducting espionage 5 years later?
Yes.
That's kind of, you got to wonder about that.
How scary. And you were in class with this guy. Jeez.
Yeah, but that's always Kevin, kind of deep thinking about stuff like that. So.
If we turn for a second to TikTok, everybody's heard about the tension there. What's your take on it? Just having this expertise that you do, like in terms of it being a threat, maybe. How would you look at that?
You ask me, of course I'm going to say it's a threat, because it's, under ByteDance, and, they could be the nicest people in the world at TikTok, but, we've already seen once when they passed information on reporters, back to China. And two, they don't have a choice. China wants the data. They're going to give them the data, period. Game, set, match. So all this, we're not going to give, really? When Zoom was slow in giving the NPS data, the NPS shut them down in China. They just woke up one morning and Zoom wasn't working anywhere. And that's because they took a couple of days to respond. So you think they're going to be any nicer to TikTok? No. The bottom line is and it's an if China wants something out of TikTok, if it wants them to manipulate political ads, if it wants them to manipulate, or collect personally identifiable information, whatever it wants, TikTok is going to do, period. And this is, something that we're going to face not only with TikTok, but with a lot of other industries that are coming from China, and it's in Chinese law. I mean, period.
And those two threats, really, it's collecting information on use of potential threats to China, reporters, dissidents, and then it's disinformation or manipulation of information.
Okay, so at a basic, yes. That collection of information is a little more sophisticated, as the estimates say that China has PII, personally identifiable information, on about 85% of Americans. Okay, massive. Yep. So TikTok just adds to that, and which is why they're so extraordinary with big data exploitation and artificial intelligence, right? So they can pull and take advantage of all these data. So, and if you think about it from a long term, that really gives them quite access to data. And it's not just the things you're watching on TikToks. It's your contact list. It's your email. It's everything else that you that out of your computer that you agree to when you click on, agree to the terms of service with TikTok. So it's not just as simple as what you're watching. So that's point number one. Point number two, yes, the manipulation of ads, showing people a lot more of something than others to manipulate public opinion, is a key concern with TikTok.
Do you think that the sale to a U.S. entity would solve this?
I think just restricting any data from going back to China, regardless of Chinese law, would solve it.
Would do it.
It does any direction. I don't know how you enforce that. What happens when the president of TikTok goes, out to Singapore, and the Chinese meet him and he says, well, we want you to collect this and that. And it'll happen 5 years from now. They're not going to do anything immediately, right? Happen X number of years from now. Or in the case of a situation like an invasion of Taiwan, where tons of propaganda will come out of it. So it's, these are the questions that we're going to have to wrestle with, not only with TikTok, but with many other forms of Chinese investment in the United States.
How about AI? Obviously, a buzzword at these times. Where are you seeing, or you've got Shinobi Enterprises, right? Like you're advising clients around the world on the China threat. What is it on the AI side that you're seeing that you advise people on these days?
Really, it's just it's an understanding of how expansive their collection program is and what the AI brings to the table under those circumstances, right? So I know a lot of people handle the cyber threat from AI, which I'm not qualified to do. However, when you start taking a look, and I actually have a course on this about China's internal security and how they do the internal security and how AI, looks at your gait, the way you walk, and does the facial recognition program and does voice recognition. And they have, sensors and microphones on street corners just to pick up voice discussion, those types of things. And they're able to do it with over a billion phones all at the same time. I mean, that's the type of power that AI has brought to the table for them. And it's really rather extraordinary. And, American officials and people just don't understand that. They don't understand, what the actual environment is like, when they go over to China. They don't understand the fact that China has a Belt and Road Initiative where they're developing the IT for it. For all the IT for dozens and dozens of countries, over 40 countries, they're developing the IT infrastructure and safe city programs and safe facial recognition programs. And then they're scarfing up all the data. So if you're walking in downtown Nairobi out of the embassy and you're traveling to China, they're not quite there yet, but they're definitely at a point where they're looking at that data and saying, "Oh, that's Nick. That's Nick who's now come to Beijing, and we saw him 3 weeks ago in Nairobi." That's an amazingly powerful capability for operators, for diplomats, for business persons, etc. So it's been a vision of theirs. That type of action has been a vision of theirs since the 1940s. So a guy by the name of Norbert Wiener publishes a book in 1948, Cybernetics. And what China got from that, and one of their father of the space program, Xie Xinzhen, right? This guy who we kick out of the country ultimately after accusing him of being a communist. He was a founder of JPL, NASA Jet Propulsion Lab, right? In 1951, he founds this lab, co-founds it. We arrest him, accusing him of being a communist. I think by 54, 55, we ultimately let him go, and he heads off back to China. Develops their space program, and their rocket forces are all due to him. In addition, he writes some papers because he read Norbert Wiener's work, and he writes some papers that catch Mao Zedong's attention and says, look, you can create this society that's interactive. People say one thing, and if you have the sensors, you can pick it up and you can have them educated, or the government can react this way. It's basically a systems of systems integrating people with machines. That's the vision. And that has been taught at cadre schools for decades. Now, the deal is now they actually have the technology to do it. It's this amazing Orwellian plan that's actually laying out for them. Really, really extraordinary to watch.
Yeah, I think they've had kind of this broad collection capability, but now that big data mining opportunity with AI just really creates some significant effects. I'll get you out of here soon, Nick. One thing I wanted to ask was about your time at DIA as a case officer, as a leader, or manager. Are there some moments in the operational space that you think back on that were close calls, tough kind of leadership lessons, challenges from your time?
I can go back a little further than that.
Yeah.
Because I did more operational stuff, I think, by the time I got to DIA, once after the 90s were over, I was stepping into more senior positions and,
less fun. Yeah.
You're a bureaucrat at that point. And it was, I'll be honest, it was very difficult. In fact, I don't know one senior executive that's come out of DIA that has said it was a great career. I loved it. It was all, it was all that. I don't know anyone. No one do I know that which is unfortunate, but it really illustrates something. very petty, a lot of political infighting. I had operations derailed because, and there was something, because when I went in before my deployment to Japan, I went into the leadership and they said, look, we want you out here. China is the issue. We want you to go take over, blah, blah, do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But beware the GS-14s and 15s, Nick. They're going to, derail.
For people listening, that is like the middle upper level of government employee. So that's your government service, right? GS 14, 15 is higher level right before you make that senior level, which you ended up making, obviously.
Right. About 15. So they, so it's, GS 15 is equal to a colonel, basically.
Yeah.
So, but, they wanted to do what they wanted to do and took, every opportunity to derail. I found myself fighting against my own bureaucracy more than I did the bad guys in this case. And that experience was not unusual for me or for anyone I know who went through that. Now, bear in mind, I think we have now a kinder, gentler intel system than we did. I mean, even 2016, 2015, 2017. I think it's changed over 9/11. I think there's been more of a push towards working together. I mean, agencies used to steal our sources. It was like it was open warfare, and I'm like, what the hell? Who thought this thing? Calling the intelligence community a community, calling that nest of piranhas a community, is one of the great ironies in life. So I found that very difficult. State Department, I thought was able to do some pretty extraordinary things, it was a good, challenging mission. Which and I was on the CI side for a good part of that. So that was a great opportunity, and it was more of a team. And I don't know if it's the training or if it's the emphasis by the department, but they really did build, within diplomatic security service, a cohesive team.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that I never experienced anything like that in DIA.
Wow. Is there anything about this idea that you can't ever go back to China or your kids that disappoints you? Like, did you enjoy that time that you had there? Or is this a place you'd like to go back to? You just know you can't.
I don't know. Right now I live pretty well. I'm not going to complain. So I just, if it's a visit, sure, I'd like to see it because I know of the dramatic changes. But the risk factor is way too high.
Yeah.
So and I'm thinking they probably wouldn't even let me in anyway. But so I don't know. I think I might feel a little differently when I go to Taiwan this coming year, and see my old stomping grounds and talk to a lot of people. I have friends in the government there, but it just Chinese culture is, it's different from being a tourist. I've actually. I was in China last week. I had an argument with somebody. Nick, I've been to China 3 times. Oh, really? How impressive. It's different. It's like visiting New York or visiting Washington and thinking that you know the United States. You don't. And it's really, the difference is really understanding it. Understanding it and working with it is, I've always found kind of tough.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see.
You always got to be thinking. It's very easy to get out manipulated there, and just
and just as we look at policy on China, like what is it you think that would need to happen for us to get this right in this country?
Strategy. Well, let's start with that. Let's start with picking the cabinet and sitting down and saying, look, in 10 years, I want 1, 2, 3 should be the nature of our relationship. Okay, and and make it happen. Let's get a strategy, X-point strategy out for how federal agencies are going to react. Let's work with the Congress on it so that we can get the legislative support that's needed for this. I mean, China is the only bipartisan area of agreement in the United States Congress, and that happened.
Yeah.
And really, it's just they're the only ones who really want to take a bipartisan approach and deal with China. So, I mean, we need to it's the senior leadership that's responsible for this. The agents are doing what the agents do, and, and the CI people are doing what they do. But it needs its leadership. It's a complete lack of leadership on our part.
And then just
It's never a positive interview when you get
No, I get it though.
in depth into these things. This is just heart wrenching.
I don't know if there's a part of our government that you could point to that's like the strat. I mean, you see what's going on in Israel. We got Russia blowing up. It's tough. We'll get out on this, but Shinobi, like, you do a lot of work in this space, educating, advising. What is it that you spend most of your time doing with Shinobi now? Like, who are the folks that you're supporting clientele wise most frequently, so that people can hear about this?
So that's interesting. That's been I'll say I have a diverse a group of customers. I certainly have companies, whether they're in the gas line industry and things like that. So I have companies that come first specifically for training their employees, and whether that's online or I have established online courses, and I'm the first one in the world that has that, by the way, in Chinese Intel. So I want to do more company work. I do a lot of government work. The month after I retired in 2017, or rather a few months after in 2018, my phone started ringing off the hook from the government and saying, Nick, we want you to come in and talk China. Really? What? God's a comedian, right? You wait till I retire, and now you have a concern on Chinese espionage. Thanks. I mean, that's honestly the way I felt. You've got to be kidding me. But so I do have a lot that I do, not only with our government, but with other governments as well, or our government cooperating with other governments. But I'd like to do more than I do in the company space. And I'll tell you why. It's simply because they need it more.
Yeah.
I tell the CI community, look, you guys are going to do what you always do. You're going to circle the wagons, throw a couple of blankets on top of your secrets and say, hooray, the world is free, democracy is saved. But that's not the case. You're not Procter and Gamble. You're not General Electric. You're not, you're not the main target set. You are a target set, but, we have seen trillions in wealth transferred over to China through intellectual property theft. And most of the time companies are doing stupid things. So it's that space I'd like to, that space where I think is most important.
And it's not just, I would imagine it's like explaining it strategically, here's what China's doing, here's how they approach problems, negotiation, that sort of thing. But also at a very tactical level, here's how you do insider threat with the Chinese, right? The counter intel side of things.
It's actually and I'll give you an example. I had someone who asked about, after they had a huge loss, a $400 million loss in R&D, and we're asking about hiring a Chinese, guy, and they specifically wanted to hire a Chinese person. Literally, they told me to show that they weren't racist. Okay, whatever. And the question was, can we effectively vet this guy? This is what we want to do. I said, don't hire him. And, well, why is that? Well, if you take a look, and goes right back to what I said about that Confucian system, take a look at his mentor in, the university that he went to, and you take a look at his mentor. His mentor's won several prizes for national security technology development. What the heck? I mean, if his mentor asks him to do something, he's going to do something. He got a PhD under the guy, and it's a very, very personal system that you have in China for that. So just things like that companies tend not to know or understand are worse or arrogant about are critically important at this point.
All right. The last question I ask everybody, looking back on that career, 34 years, lots of challenges and sacrifice, undoubtedly. And I didn't realize how painful it was at DIA. So, but with that in mind, as you look back on that time, would you do that again?
I can say yes, but that's only because it got me where I am now. I never want to live those years again. And in fact, I told my kids I'm so much against them going into that community. And it really, they're like, hey, I want to go do that. You really? You get upstairs, go to your room. That's kind of the way I look at it. But, they make their own decisions, of course, the adults at this point. But it is very stressful. It really is. And I don't wish that experience I had on anyone. I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I am where I am. But it's not something I would wish on people.
Nick, thanks so much for the time. This was a really interesting deep dive for me. Like, I could talk to you for hours on this, so I'm really appreciative we made this happen. Thank you so much.
Carol, thank you. I'm exhausted. It's been, but I am, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed that combat story with Nick. What a character and what knowledge on the Chinese side of intel. Our interview with Glenn Korn, longtime CIA legend and former multi-chief of station, talking all things Russia, made me think that I wanted to do something similar on China, and that's how I found Nick. Nick has a slightly different background being in DIA. I had no idea how tough it was there, so that was an interesting thing that I didn't really appreciate. I did know a few folks who came over to the agency from DIA, so I had seen people move, but I had never seen somebody go from the agency over to DIA, and that might explain why. But that being said, it's rare you get somebody with this kind of depth and the impact that his writing has had on both influencing our own counter-espionage and counter-intel programs, but also some of the disruption that he's done to the Chinese apparatus, which is great to hear. So I found that really interesting, and I hope you did as well. As always, please do check out our newsletter. We've got more information there about what I'm up to, thinking back to old episodes, interesting military or intel facts for this week in history, some quotes or books I might be reading or pondering, and more. And you can find that at combatstory.com/newsletter. And as always, we would appreciate any support you can give on Patreon at patreon.com/combatstory. We got a couple listener comments here. The first few are about the Kent Hillside retired Major General from his time in Vietnam, especially his time in the Iron Triangle. These are from a couple of our subscribers. So Gun Websites says, thumbs up. What a great episode. We've got Carl Fisher 4163 says, very interesting to hear this finish, which is the second episode here. He says, I was sent to Cuba after boot camp in the U.S. Navy. I don't think I could have handled Vietnam. Thanks. Really enjoy your show. Appreciate that, Carl. And then another peasant says, one of the best. Photos tell a story that words can't, especially in terms of explaining terrain. Vietnam is not for the claustrophobic, LOL. For those who have listened to that episode, particularly watched it, we dug into a lot of the images that he had from his time in service, so you could really get a feel of what it was like talking through both the tank, the jungles, the operations, the tactics, the maps, etc. And then we've got 2 Apple 5-star reviews. One is from Too Lost to Care. It says, keep up the good work. Thank you for telling veteran stories. I really enjoy the podcast. I've been going back and listening to all the past stories on here. I'd like to also thank you and all the veterans who have sacrificed so much. Thank you so much for leaving that and sharing. And then Hank37 says, just found this podcast on a simple military podcast search query, and I'm 5 episodes deep on my trip to New Orleans and back. Thank you, Ryan, for giving us civvies in the private sector an inside glimpse of the heroes that keep the blood of freedom flowing through the heart of America, with a bunch of American flags, which I love. Don't know why you're heading to New Orleans, Hank, but I hope you have a great trip. And if you do hit up that World War II museum, please let me know. Went there a long time ago, and it's a cool one. So with that, thank you all for sticking it out with me this long. Wherever you are in the world, whether it's your week or weekend, hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for listening, and stay safe.